All right, so we'll go ahead and make a start. Pleasant good morning again, everyone. Just give me a thumbs up if you're hearing me and you're seeing me clearly. All right. Good, good. Um, Let me acknowledge the presence of our partners. Um, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Joseph Noel, the UNCCD focal point of Grenada, representing the Minister, the Honorable Adrian Thomas this morning. Happy to have you here with us, Mr. Noel. Ms. Derelle Dubois, Regional Chairperson of CYEN, members of our partner agencies, the FAO, our wonderful soil care consultants, project assistants, project managers. Pleasant good morning to you all of our attendees at the Caribbean Youth from the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and afar. Pleasant good morning to you all as well. And so we'll get right into our program. We have a packed program this morning. And first we'll have a message from our Executive Director, Mr. Calvin James. Now, unfortunately, Mr. James could not be here with us physically, but he did prepare a recording for us this morning.
Good morning, Caribbean citizens. It is my pleasure as the Executive Director for the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management to be part of this important Caribbean dialogue. Before we begin, allow me to acknowledge Mr. Noel Joseph, the UNCCD focal point for the island of Grenada, who is here on behalf of His Excellency, the Honorable Adrian Thomas, Minister. May I also acknowledge Ms. Derelle Bois. She is the Regional Chairperson for CYEN. I would like to also acknowledge all our partner agencies online. I would also like to mention Mr. Trevor Thompson, our hardworking project manager for the premier regional land and soil project in the Caribbean, known as Soil Care. And big up to all our soil care project assistants and all those who are online. Good morning. PISLM is honored to be part and to partner with one of, in my respectful view, one of the premier environmental agencies in the Caribbean, which, by the way, happens to be led by young people. We at PISLM are happy to celebrate World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought with CYEN and to celebrate this in the Caribbean with our partner agencies. PISLM has been working in the region since 2007, and we take this opportunity to thank all those who have worked with us and partnered with us in meeting the obligations set by us by CARICOM. The use of land is everybody's business. The UNCCD is not just a convention on land and drought, but it's a convention that reminds us of the intricate connection that we have with land and its many life-sustaining capabilities. The land, revered by many as one of the greatest blessings after that of life, is an integral part of our humanity. Land is not meant to be owned and controlled for the sole purpose of economic gain. Land has intrinsic values that we overlook on a daily basis. The climate crisis is intricately linked to our land. Climate events further degrade our lands, whether it's through drought or flooding. Unsustainable use of the land accelerates climate change by releasing massive amounts of stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Land is a finite resource for us here in the Caribbean, and we are at the front lines of the climate crisis. So let us take a moment to assess our development initiatives carefully with land at the center. This year, as we observe World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought under the banner Her Land, Her Rights, let us be reminded of the unsung heroes of our land, our women and girls. Women and girls make up a large portion of the labor force on our lands, but seldom own the land on which they work. Globally, less than 20% of the landholders are women. In the Caribbean, it's not better. We are very limited in our data, however, to give a precise figure, but the data surrounding women and land tenure is an ongoing work in progress. In Latin America and the Caribbean, women constitute only about 20% of all landowners. Despite doing better than men in academics, women continue to face grave hurdles in the process to attain land and access financial mechanisms for working the land. In many of our rural communities, women tend to occupy and farm on communal or marginal lands, which are not secure forms of land tenure or food security. In the Caribbean, these issues are further expounded because of our geographies and lack of institutional mechanisms to address the needs of women and girls. Not only in the agricultural sector do our women and girls face this hurdle, but other land sectors such as forestry, GIS, and engineering. In the Caribbean, our land is our sustenance. Who best to manage and care our lands than our women who nurture our children? So as we celebrate World Desertification and Drought Day, we at the PISLM salute the Caribbean's women and girls as we look forward to developing our Caribbean community. I thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. James. I hope everyone heard the video clearly. And Mr. James would have addressed some key issues that have been highlighted continuously. And we hope that in the areas of land that we take this opportunity as a Kickstarter to addressing these issues. All right. All right, moving ahead with the agenda. Next, we have our feature address by Ms. Derelle Dubois, the Regional Chairperson of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Ms. Dubois, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakeram. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on this special day. So getting right into it. Today, we gather with the goal of spreading awareness on land desertification and drought, inclusive of women's contributions to sustainable land management and support to advance land rights for women and girls. It is understood that land degradation and drought is not only about land, but about people. From a global perspective, as of 2021, our lands continue to degrade at a shocking rate. More than 1.5 million people were affected by droughts between the years 1998 and 2017, with economic losses estimated at $124 billion. By 2015, 500 million people were living in areas which had already experienced the onset of desertification in prior decades. The COVID-19 pandemic then pushes 97 million more people into poverty, with women most affected. We speak of women being affected in terms of health, income, unpaid care work, rise in gender-based violence, and reduced access to social protection programs. In the vast majority of countries, women have unequal and limited access to controlled land. They remain subjected to discriminatory laws and practices that impede their right to inherit access to services and resources. When women do have rights, they often own smaller and less fertile plots compared to male landowners. And yet they contribute to reversing, halting, and minimizing land degradation. They restore land, they protect land, they cherish, nourish, and care for land while also caring for others. In the Caribbean scope, Jamaica possesses the highest share, 30% of female registered farmers. Then in contrast, only 6% of the workforce in agricultural jobs are female in the country of Belize, while the highest in the region is 24.5% in Trinidad and Tobago. Women make valuable contributions to land restoration efforts through recovery of traditional adaptation practices and in the design and implementation of new and sustainable methods, such as rainwater jars, new irrigation systems, and seedling nurseries, all run by women, which produce drought-resistant and high-quality plants. When given access to agricultural technologies, technical training, and climate science information, women's contributions become broader and more effective. There has been substantial work done to minimize and mitigate the impacts of land degradation and drought headed by powerful women in our region. And we recognize these efforts here today as we commemorate this year's theme, Her Land, Her Rights. Finally, I would like to end with a quote by Ms. Earthren Cousin, a lecturer and former executive director of the World Food Programme, when she said, "Ending gender inequity is not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. Because FAO tells us giving women farmers access to the resources they need would lift up to 150 million people out of hunger." Thank you.
Very much, Ms. Dubois, for those lovely pieces of statistics and for bringing and for hitting home actually to really show how much women have contributed not only in the region but globally to our land sector. And I know many times when we think land, we always tend to go to agriculture because it's probably the most fulfilling and one of the most sensitive and life-sustaining economic activities that we partake in and use the land for. So thanks so much for those messages, Ms. Dubois, and we're happy to have you. It gives me great pleasure then to introduce the UNCCD focal point, Mr. Joseph Noel, representing the Honorable Minister Adrian Thomas of Grenada. Mr. Noel, you have the floor, and we are so happy to have you here this morning. Go right ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Singh. Executive Director of the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management, Mr. Calvin James, who is not present with us this morning, but I still want to acknowledge him. The Regional Chair of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, Ms. Derelle Dubois. Project Manager of the CYEN Soil Care Project, Phase 1, Mr. Trevor Thompson. Specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to each and every one of you. As the UNCCD focal point for Grenada and as the representative of the Minister responsible for agriculture, lands, forestry, fisheries, and cooperatives in Grenada at this morning's webinar, I am pleased to be associated with this regional observance of World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. The United Nations Observance of Desertification and Drought Day is held on the 17th of June each year. The 2023 Desertification and Drought Day has as its theme, Her Land, Her Rights, Advancing Gender Equality and Land Restoration Goals. I applaud the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management, PISLM, and the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, CYEN, for partnering together to put on this regional webinar, which is being held under the theme, Building a Healthy Soil Ecosystem for a Sustainable Future, and which intends to jumpstart a regional focus on youth involvement particularly young Caribbean women, in soil and land issues to ensure the sustainability of projects and initiatives undertaken in the name of protecting our soils. In the case of Grenada, because of our small size, there is intense competition for land for a multiple of uses. We also have large acreages of degraded land and soil, which must be brought back to a state where they can be used to propel the sustainable development of our tri-island state. The government has made restoration of degraded land and soil a priority since 2019, because we understand that restored degraded land and soil brings economic resilience, creates jobs, raises incomes, and increases food security. It helps biodiversity to recover, locks away the atmospheric carbon warming the earth, and also lessens the impacts of climate change and climate variability. Investing in land restoration and soil remediation and conservation makes sense, because when we restore degraded lands and soils, we are also restoring people's lives and guaranteeing a bright future. That is why Grenada, like other country parties to the UNCCD Convention, has set national voluntary land degradation neutrality targets, in which we have committed to increase the fertility and productivity of 580 hectares of cropland by 2030. 2, transform 800 hectares of abandoned cropland into agroforestry by 2030. 3, implement soil conservation measures on 120 hectares of land by 2030. 4, rehabilitation of 383 hectares of degraded land at Bellevue South in Carriacou by 2030. 5, rehabilitation of 100 hectares of degraded forests on the mainland Grenada and the sister isle of Carriacou by 2030. And 6, increase our forest carbon stocks by 10% by 2030. Our current commitments will join those from over 100 countries that has pledged the restoration of almost 1 billion hectares of land over the next decade, an area almost the size of the People's Republic of China. If we restore this land, we can deliver massive benefits for the people and the planet. International Desertification and Drought Day is closely related to Goal 15, Life, and I'm talking about Sustainable Development Goal 15, Life of Terrestrial Ecosystems, goals that we hope to achieve by 2030. This year, the day is a unique moment to remind everyone that land degradation neutrality is achievable through participation and cooperation at all levels. We cannot achieve land degradation neutrality without seriously considering and taking measures to promote soil conservation and soil biodiversity and to enhance soil fertility. Land and soil degradation is a direct threat to our food and nutrition security, water security, and health security. Land and soil degradation is a direct threat to our economic and social well-being and increases our vulnerability to climate change and natural hazards. When our land and soil undergo degradation and stops being productive, natural spaces deteriorate and biodiversity decreases. I am therefore calling on all of us to treat the land and soil as a limited and precious natural capital. Prioritize its health in this post-COVID-19 era and push hard to restore degraded land and soil during this UN decade on ecosystem restoration. Everyone has a role to play, including our women and youth. I call upon our young women, young men, youth organizations, and women farmers organizations across the region to help drive the messages on the importance of soil health, soil conservation, and land degradation neutrality. You have a key role to play in the process of building a healthy soil ecosystem for a sustainable future. The government of Grenada in 2021 approved the Grenada National Land Policy and has since drafted the Natural Resources Management Bill, which focuses on the protection of our land and natural resources, including soil. The government of Grenada, through the Ministry of Agriculture and Lands, Fisheries and Cooperatives, is also pleased to be participating in several regional initiatives, such as the Caribbean Small Island Developing States Multi-Country Soil Management Initiative for Integrated Landscape Restoration and Sustainable Food Systems, CICID Soil Care Project, Phase 1. The Integrated Landscape Approaches and Investments in Sustainable Land Management in the OECS-ILM project, the Integrating Water, Land, and Ecosystems Management in Caribbean Small Island Developing States, the IWECO project, and also the Triangular Regional Cooperation Project. These projects are all focused on enhancing our soil to guarantee its fertility and productivity for the benefit of present and future generations. The drafting of a land degradation neutrality transformative project concept for submission to the Green Climate Fund that will focus on the cocoa, nutmeg, and forestry subsectors, thus recultivating thousands of acres that have been left abandoned since the passage of Hurricanes Ivan and Emily in 2004 and 2005, respectively. The Ministry of Agriculture and Lands, Fisheries and Cooperatives is committed to ensuring Grenada uses all its arable lands to meet its food security needs, while protecting its fertility for future generations. We are committed to advancing the sector, but doing so in a wise and sustainable manner to improve livelihoods and maintain a healthy environment. The government of Grenada, on this occasion of World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought 2023, encourages every one of us to join the national, regional, and global fight to restore degraded lands and soils. We make a special plea to the young women and young men of our region to make your voices heard and your actions count when it comes to promoting and practicing sustainable soil management, sustainable land management, and biodiversity conservation. May God bless us all as we strive to build a healthy soil ecosystem for a sustainable future for the people of our region. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noel, for bringing the policy spin on the land degradation aspects of this day. Please extend also our appreciation to the Minister for first indicating his willingness to be part of today's webinar. Thank you once again. All right, now we get into the exciting stuff, right, where we have our young women presenting their various projects to us today. And just to inform everyone, and as Mr. Noel would have said, the webinar today intends to be a kickstart, a jumpstart to making our women more visible and the work that they do more visible, and also to ensure the sustainability of our projects. You know, a lot of times we have projects and they're very good projects and we execute them to the best of our abilities, but there is no continuity for our youngsters to build on the platform that is being built by our adults now. And so, you know, we want to ensure that we take these messages and we act on them, not just file them into our cabinets. We act on them. So moving along, we have our first presenter, Miss Tricianna Maharaj. She is a student at the University of the West Indies. She's a PhD candidate, and I'm sure she'll be telling you more about her work that she has ongoing at this moment. So without further ado, I will now introduce you to Ms. Maharaj. Mr. Maharaj, you have the floor.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, Lakeram. I'm Tricianna Maharaj. I'm actually one of the PISLM staff. I'm the liaison officer based at UWC St. Augustine. So So good morning again, everyone. Today, my presentation will be looking at Fusarium wilt. For those of you, the Fusarium wilt is a fungal disease that affects bananas as well as other crops. But for the purpose of this presentation, it's focused mainly on bananas. Not particularly a specific variety as yet, as we may be running trials on several varieties. Fusarium wilt is an emerging regional concern, and it's one of the reasons why I chose this as my research project. So just a brief intro into the presentation. I'll go through the background to Fusarium wilt, a brief literature review, and just to discuss the 3 different chapters that would encompass my thesis, the conclusion, and of course some references in case some of you are curious and want to do some further reading. So Fusarium wilt, some people say Fusarium wilt. So it's basically the same thing. It's caused by a fungus and it's a global concern. So bananas generally generate close to $13.5 billion US per year, and that's based on some 2022 FAO figures, and an estimated export volume of 21 million tons. Bananas are among the most produced, traded, and consumed fruits globally. I think most of us are aware of how big the banana industry is. The particular varieties where that encompasses 40% of global production is called the cannabis variety, and that accounts for 15% of global exportation. Banana production is important for the economies of many developing countries as it contributes to whole household food security as well as generates income. So given the economic viability of the crop and its threat from fungal disease, especially Fusarium wilt, which is actually one of the most threatening fungal disease affecting banana plantations across the globe, especially the variety called TRD4, which isn't in Trinidad yet, but we still need to make preparatory works in the event that it does infiltrate our borders, which at some point it will, because it has been detected in Venezuela as of recent. So this study will look to evaluate mechanisms to facilitate effective treatments and management of the fungal disease. There has been decades of work on Fusarium wilt. Definitely there has been extensive review of the literature when it comes to Fusarium wilt, but presently there isn't any cost-effective management strategy for the disease. And there have not been many commercial trials to see how cost-effective it is in relation to some of these treatments. And also, despite having years of research work, there isn't any proven satisfactory results yet to say that, yes, it is cost-effective as well as economically sound, or it combats the disease 100%. I mean, no particular bioformulation or methodology could fully combat a disease 100% because there are so many factors, but it's still a gap in our literature as well as the research globally. So like I was saying before, there are no commercial varieties of banana displaying effective resistance against TRD4 especially. Their biological control of disease has become a growing method of management and treating, given implications of pesticides and fertilizers on human health as well as environmental concerns. So biological control agents against Fusarium wilt of bananas, to date, there has been no proven fungicides that could really effectively treat with it on a large scale. So there have been some recent studies I just wanted to quote. So the recent study in 2002 focused on alternative eco-friendly approaches to the management of this disease. So the actual approach would disrupt the biofilms, so therefore disrupting the fungal community and reducing its impact on the plant. There's a study that demonstrated that essential oils from plants are environmentally friendly and can manage fungal disease. I don't have the list of essential oils on me at hand right now. There's another study that investigated the pathogen attack mechanism and the host defense of the plant. Those studies have been proven to be worthwhile and could have further investigations or trials run to better evaluate it, especially in our agroecological zones. There are some other studies that use bioformulations for biocontrol using certain bacteria, and also using bentonite clay as a carrier. So some of these have proven to be useful or impactful for the banana industry, but again, a lot of these are small trials, but nothing at a commercial scale or nothing that's shown to be cost effective. There have also been other studies that demonstrated that calcium hydroxide or agricultural lime is used as a base for the plant disease, and this has also hindered the proliferation of some of these fungal diseases, especially Fusarium wilt. So the pH increase, however, may have some negative impacts on the plants, so that's still something that needs to be further evaluated. So just to give a brief overview of the chapters in this work, first chapter will be looking at evaluating the efficiency and efficacy of bioformulations on the growth and productivity of bananas when infected with this particular fungal disease. Overall, here the assessment of diversity, structure, and assemblage of the bacterial and the fungal communities associated with banana plants will help us better understand the relationship between these microbial species and Fusarium wilt. So the second slide would look at assessing the microbial diversity in the rhizosphere of the banana in response to bioformulation interactions. So we'll compare the distribution of the microbial communities in the wilt and disease-free soils against soils treated with bioformulants, so that we would get a comparative analysis of what is better taking place to help us move forward with managing the disease. And finally, chapter 3. So it will investigate the different gene expression in bananas against Fusarium wilt when treated with bioformulations using different technology, especially more current technology that we have available, like running PCR tests, looking at genetic diversity, things like that. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. So generally, bioformulations provide an sustainable alternate approach to treating with some of these diseases, and it's also going to give us a little more edge against using some of these pesticides or fertilizers, especially given their negative impacts on the water, the soil, the environment, land, health, everything. So with regards to how this project is going to impact on women, so it's estimated that women represent on average less than a fifth of the global workforce in banana, but there's still a high participation in the industry, especially in the Caribbean. So with this study, we're hoping to also just not include random, in this essence, we'll be including random farms to do evaluations on, as well as greenhouse and field trials, but we'll also try to include women as part of our this study. So a lot of the training and disease management, while we geared towards men as well, we also like to include women as part of it, given their impact and role in the banana industry and in agriculture on the whole. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. The last slide is a list of references that if anyone is interested, some of these are new and recent references on the disease itself and some of the assessments or work that has been carried out, and some of the assessments we will be carrying out on our own to just do some evaluation and see where we can tweak it to ensure that it could be done at within our region at our level. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tricianna. A round of applause to Tricianna. And I really hope that your research, your study is successful in helping us to combat this problem if we experience it in the Caribbean. I don't know about you guys, but I like to eat bananas and I don't want the price to go up because of the Fusarium wilt. Plantain is already expensive, and I know everybody could probably attest to that. So we don't need that happening. So all the best to Tricianna with her studies. And we do look forward to coming back to you to get an update on your project later on. So do we have any questions? We have about 5 minutes for questions. All right, we do have a question here from Mr. Steve Maxime. Mr. Maxime, you could go right ahead.
Thank you. Very good morning, Lakeram and Tricianna. I just wanted to ask Tricianna about the significance of mentioning this disease on a day that we are looking at combating drought and desertification. Is it a disease that is more prevalent in dry soils or wetter soils? Is there any connection with drought and desertification in terms of your choice of research topic to present?
Hi, Mr. Maxime. Thanks for the question. This is my only research topic, actually. But generally, some of these fungal diseases thrive better in wet conditions as opposed to dry conditions, because the water facilitates their as part of their food and uptake to just ensure survival of their microbes. So it's more linked to wet conditions. There have been some studies that show that there are dry conditions, but there isn't any extensive research right now with regards to Fusarium wilt linkages to different climatic conditions, but it's generally very prevalent in humid environments like ours.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maxime. Thank you, Tricianna. We have a question in the chat from Kent Thomas. This for Tricianna. Are these gender agriculture statistics directly related to the Caribbean? Has any statistical analysis been performed based on the Caribbean context? In the banana industry, is there any hard statistics in the Caribbean showing a lower participation by women? So Tricianna, maybe you could speak to that maybe in your literature, if you would have come across any such data.
In my literature review, I mainly focused on just looking at different methodologies that will get towards combating Fusarium wilt. I didn't look at a specific Caribbean context when it comes to women, but I did pick up on a few readings that the percentage of women involved in the banana industry in the Caribbean is higher. I don't have the source on me at hand. I forgot to note it. But no, I would say generally I haven't really come across any hard statistics. So that's definitely a gap within our, that's definitely a research gap. And it's something that, given the regional importance of this project, we can actually start gathering data to have a more informed statistical analysis when it comes to questions like this. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Ken Thomas. Thank you, Tricianna. Mr. Maxime, you like a follow-up question?
No, I just wanted to address the question about female banana farmers. When I was a member of the board of WINFA and during the fair trade era of banana trading, we did have a significant membership, female membership, in all of the fair trade groups in the 3 participating countries at the time, in St. Lucia, in Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I just wanted to say that in terms of gender disparity, it tends to be less where banana production is concerned.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Maxime, for that information. I do appreciate it. And thank you as well, Tricianna, for your presentation. In keeping with the time, any further questions we'll keep for at the end of the presentations. And so we will move right into our next presentation. We have Miss Nelissia Coipel, who's a technical officer at the Dominica Bureau of Standards and a graduate of UWI St. Augustine with a bachelor's degree in agriculture. And she has a wealth of experience in the agriculture industry related to standards, standards and practices within the agriculture industry. So without further ado, I will hand over to Miss Coipel. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be there today presenting to you. Today, I'm not involved directly in any project like the former presenter. However, I work in standards development. So therefore, I'm going to tie the two together, standards and sustainable land management today. Okay, so for today, I'm going to briefly say what are standards used in sustainable land management, the impact of standard land management standards on the wider community, and impact on women's current and future involvement in the land sector. Okay, I just wanted to note this briefly. Standards are part of our everyday life. Before I actually started at the Bureau, I wasn't so sure about standards. We know we have certain protocols, certain things that are mandatory that we must follow, but you know, when I actually started working at the Bureau, that is when I actually delved deeper into actually getting a better understanding of standards, and it is involved in the simplest things as possible. So what are standards? A standard is an agreed, repeatable way of doing something. It is a published document that contains a technical specification on other precise criteria designed to be used consistently as a rule, guideline or definition. And on this side, you could see an example of an ISO standard, which actually focus on environmental management. So the functions of the Dominica Bureau of Standards. So we promote and develop standards for industrial efficiency and development, public and industrial welfare, health and safety, safeguarding the environment, and facilitating market competitiveness. However, today we are mainly focusing on safeguarding the environment. So the types of standards. So as I said, there are international standards. So we have ISO, which is the International Organization for Standardization. We have ASTM, the American Society for Testing and Materials. IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission. The regional, we have CYEN, European Committee for Standardization. PERSQ, CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. And the national standards, we have the Dominica Bureau of Standards, the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, and within the Caribbean, all the countries actually have national bodies. So types of documents, you can have specification, methods, guides, codes of practices. Standards could also be developed for vocabulary and classification. So standard used in sustainable land management. So first and foremost, I wanted to just focus a little on the international standards, which was recently developed, ISO 14055-1 2017. And then there's a second part, ISO TR 14055-2 2022. So basically it is environmental management, the guidelines for establishing good practices for combating land degradation and desertification. The reason I mentioned this international standard, normally as a national body, when you are developing standards, we would actually look for international standards we could either use to adopt as a country. With the adoption, you would modify it so it to suit your topography, certain conditions that is actually related to your country specifically. So for us, for example, we would actually develop or modify that standard to suit Dominica climates, Dominica's topography. Okay, and I'm just going to give a brief explanation on each. So ISO 14055 Part 1, it speaks about the types of land degradation observed within our ecosystem structure and biodiversity and biomass decrease after clear cutting. There is a natural replacement of the forest with secondary forests of reduced productivity, which results in a reduction in biomass and a decrease in species diversity, as well as a reduction in carbon stocks. Great areas of woodlands, which were cleared and transformed to open space for agriculture purposes that were later abandoned. There is natural wind and water erosion, frequently aggravated by human activities such as agriculture and overcatching. So the first document refers to actions or interventions undertaken with the purpose of preventing or minimizing degradation of land where land is already degraded, aiding the recovery of degraded land to improve productivity and ecosystem health. Okay, combating land degradation is critical to achieving sustainable development, and hence good practices programs need to seek to attain a balance between environmental, social, and economic goals. These goals are interdependent and need to be mutually reinforced. For example, the capacity of individual land managers and communities to implement good practices for combating land degradation can be limited by immediate challenges of poverty and hunger. Conversely, combating land degradation will contribute to greater socio-economic as well as environmental resilience. Whereas the second document, which is ISO Part 2 14055 Part 2, it provides case studies on the management of land degradation from all hemispheres of the global and across tropical, subtropical, and temperate climates, and from a variety of tropical areas, including deserts, wetlands, and marginal landscapes. Okay? And those documents are documents that could actually be sourced from the ISO website. I just wanted to make that clear for if in case anybody want to do further reading. Now the codes of practices. So again, PISLM actually, there's an ongoing project where codes of practices will actually develop for ginger, passion fruit, cocoa, and so on. The Dominica Bureau of Standards, even if we're not deeply involved in terms of putting the standards together, but we're also the body that actually reviews the documents, okay? So these documents actually contain areas where sustainable land management is actually included. For example, contour farming, because of our topography in Dominica, you would have to do contour farming, right? Rotational farming to reduce nutritional depletion in the soil. And then also, us at the Dominica Bureau of Standards, we also have the certification scheme for DOMGAP. So sustainable land management is part of our DOMGAP program. So currently, we are actually developing a national standard for Dominica, which is DDNS 23. The reason why it's an X, you see in 202X is because until the standard isn't fully developed, you cannot put a year, right? So we just have to leave it as an X. So Dominica Good Agricultural Practices, DOMGAP, Interpretation Guidelines. So within that certification scheme, there is a mention of sustainable land management practices, which will become mandatory eventually for Dominica, right? So it's something just like the COPs. With the COPs that is actually developed under the PISLM project, in the near future, we could actually use those COPs to actually create or include in our certification scheme, where it is mandated that farmers would actually have to follow these procedures to reduce land degradation. Now, impact of sustainable land management standards on the wider community. So long-term productivity is threatened by increasing soil degradation and water scarcity, which is severe enough to reduce global yields. Drought and other extreme climate events can lead to extreme loss of production that primarily affects smallholding farmers whose livelihoods depends to a high degree on subsistence agriculture, which is common in Dominica. We do a lot of subsistence farming. SLM helps to increase food security, primarily for smallholding farmers, provide local energy, provide local fresh and clean water. As you know, Dominica, we do have a wide mass of water on the island, and we have a lot of underground water, you know, and even with land degradation, it actually affects underground water. Increasingly intensive soil use for cultivation and livestock production results in significant loss of vegetation cover. This is greater runoff and increased soil erosion by wind and water, loss of soil organic carbon, crusting and desiccation of soils, and related declines in groundwater and surface water levels. Soil nutrients are excessively depleted by soil transport and leaching. So SLM helps to mitigate soil degradation and enhance soil development, increase soil moisture, and enabling soil development and functions, enhance primary production and nutrient cycling, preserve biodiversity at the farm level through agroforestry and intercropping. Inappropriate land management can seriously affect water availability and supply by changing the water cycle in drylands. A decrease in the surface cover and litter dramatically lowers water infiltration in the soil, which results in higher surface runoff. Bare soil also leads to increased evaporation loss from the soil surface. The result is reduced soil moisture and reduced groundwater recharge. SLM helps to preserve soil moisture, increase primary production, regulate river, lake, and groundwater level. Benefits for culture and society. Cultural landscapes embody traditional values, proven knowledge, and experience gained over centuries. Cultural and natural landscape provide cultural identity. SLM helps to keep alive cultural and natural landscapes and protect cultural heritage, valorize indigenous indigenous knowledge and production methods and enhance ecotourism. And I use the Kalinago as an example because this group actually depends on the land a lot for livelihood. And impact on women's current and future involvement in the land sector. So as I spoke about standards, I wanted to base the specific statement on standards development. So women's full and effective participation in and contribution to the development of standards for sustainable land management is critical to harness gender equality and women's empowerment as drivers of sustainable development. Really and truly, through research, I learned that in the past, women was not involved in the development of standards, the process. So currently, slowly but surely, we are actually seeing that percentage increasing. And I am part of a number of committees, like for example, the food committee, which develops standards for food. So like even certain products and plants in terms of production. And what I've observed on these committees is that there's a very small percentage of women on these committees. So normally on an average, you would see at least 2 or 3 women, but majority is men. Right, so it is actually good that women is slowly becoming part of that process. Thank you. So this is the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Coipel, and thank you so much for your presentation. And we do have, I'll run right into the questions. We do have question in the chat. Kent Thomas inquiring whether Dominica has test plots to experiment on land degradation in the local context. Would you care to maybe answer that question?
Okay, well, currently, I actually was an intern at ICA, Mr. Sims. So I do have an idea of the PISLM project, and I do know there are a few demonstration plots, but however, even locally, in terms of our farmers, so normally our demonstration plots would actually, it's actually situated on farmers' land, right? And there are a few farmers in the north of the island who actually practice some of these sustainable land management practices, right? So as I mentioned, the counter farming, I know this is practiced for sure, and also the intercropping, which actually reduce the depletion of the nutrients. So this is one of the 2 reasons why I specifically mentioned those 2 examples.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so if I can add a little more context, true. So from the demonstration plots that Ms. Coipel is mentioning as part of one of the PISLM's projects, currently we are establishing the contour drains and the storm drains, and the idea for sustainability through our research and advisory facility based at the UE campus in St. Augustine, we'll be using these demonstration sites to then test how effective these interventions are, whether we do sediment traps to measure rates of erosion, and we do maybe we look at the fertility over time to see or looking at the rate of leaching of our nutrients due to these interventions. And we do have some other interventions which I'm sure will come up in other presentations that we have coming up. So thank you once again, Ms. Coipel. We're so happy to have you here with us this morning. And are there any more questions or comments from Ms. Coipel with regards to her presentation? I think from my experience going to Dominica, I can see now how important standards are in terms of managing land use and preventing land degradation. You know, Dominica is a very steep, very mountainous, very steep island, and we need these standards in place to prevent degradation and desertification of our once fertile lands. So thank you once again, Ms. Coipel. We'll move right into our next presentation. We have Ms. Vikki Lee, also a student at the UE St. Augustine. and her research topic is investigating the potential of the vetiver grass for forest restoration of abandoned quarries. So Miss Vikki Lee, you have the floor. Thank you.
Very much. A pleasant good morning, everyone. I'm Vikki Lee, and I am under the Department of Geography in UA St. Augustine. My supervisor is Dr. Keegan Farrick, and I'm excited to let you know about my research project on the potential of vetiver grass for forest restoration and abandoned quarries. Thank you. So first, let's identify exactly what the problem is. The problem is that humans are a very impactful and powerful geomorphological agent, and that is due to how we utilize and how we change land size. These changes, though, often degrade and change how our natural or complex natural systems and landscapes function, and how our ecosystems, one, respond to external stresses, and two, how they are able to provide the services that we depend on them for. Now, quarries are a great example of an industry that has very significant land use impacts. In 2013, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries estimated that there are about 90 active quarries in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, you also have the issue of how those quarries are being managed and if they're even legal or privatized and whatnot. And the issue of quarrying is that we know it will involve deforestation, removal of the topsoil, extraction of the various aggregates depending on the quarry, as well as waste production. Yes, all of this contributes to the inability of the soil to provide the nutrients and such for vegetation. And essentially what you're doing is creating this blank slate with a very harsh environment and leaving gaps for invasive species that are often a lot more aggressive and vigorous and tend to outcompete our local forests. Of course, this could create potential issues in the biodiversity of the ecosystem and serious challenges regarding ecology. So this is where vetiver comes in. You may have heard of vetiver. If you're familiar with it, you probably know that it's being used a lot in erosion control and slope stabilization. You may have even heard of it being used as a form of phytoremediation in terms of heavy metal uptake. You may not have heard of the anecdotal reports from farmers who ended up planting vetiver next to their crops and realized that, you know, something is happening. Maybe the coconut tree grew faster and had more production. And essentially, all these points are the crux of my thesis. You've probably heard of companion planting and not even realized it. You'd often hear that farmers plant certain crops next to each other, be it to improve nutrient cycling. Nitrogen fixation is a big one in terms of peas. You also have agroforestry, which is a great technique for land management. And essentially, companion planting is a symbiotic technique which is used to address challenges to plant growth, survival, and productivity. And the great thing about this multifaceted solution that is vetiver is that, you know, you don't have those maintenance costs associated so much. You do have some maintenance, but unlike building a retention wall or something, these hedgerows will tend to improve over time and get better at what they do. I've brought vetiver to you, and you'll be wondering, why exactly is vetiver a good candidate? Well, the physiological, morphological, and ecological characteristics of vetiver all contribute to its success as a soft engineering intervention. It is extremely tolerant and resilient under a variety of climates and environmental conditions, including but not limited to flooding, drought, compaction under livestock, and that kind of thing. Vetiver also has a very deep root network, estimated to grow to about 3 to 4 meters within the first year. This in particular, of course, would be great for its organic matter contribution, improving soil infiltration and soil stability. But this was of particular interest to us too, because the stage at which we were looking at for the tree restoration, the forest restoration, was the sapling stage, meaning that they don't have particularly deep roots. And we would expect that the vetiver and the trees will not be competing for the same zone of nutrients and water. Additionally, it is sterile and non-aggressive. So you will not have vetiver where you do not want vetiver. It is propagated by replanting the slips. So it was eventually grows in large clumps, and you the slips and you extend the hedgerow. Additionally, it is not particularly shade tolerant. So in this study, when the trees were expected to grow and survive on their own, you would just have the vetiver being shaded out. So ultimately, some studies believe that natural succession is the best way to restore degraded land. But I believe that there's immense potential, particularly in quarries. Even though the environment is challenging, it definitely is not impossible to, return them to productivity. One example is, well, we're working with an NGO known as Iron Movement, and they have a couple of pilot sites they have planted trees and various other crops. And additionally, there's a study that took place in 2014 in India, where they found that if India was able to allocate just 10% of its degraded lands to vetiver systems, they could sequester approximately 50% of India's total carbon emissions. So yeah, I think that once we conquer this challenge that is quarries, I think the study could really help guide other campaigns for degraded lands and other zones for rehabilitation. Additionally, quarries are a significant contribution in terms of hazards and whatnot. And this is a particular issue when it comes to the stresses of climate change. I think it's important to note that women and children are particularly vulnerable during disasters, and this could significantly change due to the cultural and social norms of where they are located. In certain countries in the Middle East, women quite literally have no freedom of movement without the supervision of their husbands, and that could significantly change how they respond to a disaster. You also have that issue where women would be primarily socially responsible for the care of children during and after disaster, and of course themselves. And additionally, they would also require different medical care during disasters, especially in the case of pregnancy. But even without such severe cases of gender inequality, women will always be vulnerable to disasters that lead to displacement and loss of income, especially abuse. With that said, the overarching question is, does vetiver function as an effective companion species? And we will answer that question by determining the effects of vetiver on soil hydraulic properties, investigating the hydrological and microclimatological regimes in soil planting with and without vetiver, and investigating the patterns of water uptake and redistribution by vetiver in the soil matrix. So those of you who may not be exactly familiar with Trinidad, and I know I didn't mention it before, but my site is located in National Quarries in Sangre Grande, so it is a northeast community. In the inside map, you can see the quarry. It's pretty big. I think where I have the yellow marker is where the head office and whatnot is located. And you can see that my site is pretty far off. I think it's like a 2-kilometer drive to the quarry. I have two locations. One is what we consider high topography, and one that we consider low topography. So these are some pictures of the site. The right image is the lower side. We consider that the beach area. You can see it's very sandy and very, very dry. The picture on the left, I think it was really important to include this, just a localized case of some erosion that was happening. And this is the road, the access road between the two sites. And you can see, particularly this year, the land really collapsed, and well, I have to do a lot more walking. Right, this is a short video of some of the inundation that's happening now at the lower sites with the onset of rain in this season that recently just started. We suspect that the area has a particularly high water table. There's also a stream nearby too, so you could kind of get an idea of how much water is in the system, basically, yeah. And this is the upper site. They look somewhat similar, I guess you could say. Perhaps you'd say this is a bit greener. In the back, you could a bit clearly more see the invasive species that I would have mentioned a bit earlier, known as acacia. That grows really, really well in the quarry. But I believe it has like it's a somewhat aggressive species of ants too, so there's that issue. But yeah, initially on the surface, you would think it's a bit, this site is sandy as well, but recently we had a campaign where we had to dig some soil pits for samples, and it was really difficult. We were sampling to about 50 centimeters, and we couldn't get to 50 centimeters up at this site. The image on the right is supposed to be a video, unfortunately. Right, so the field plan is, we have two plant species, olive and immortelle. Olive is supposed to be the slower growing plant, and the immortelle is supposed to be faster growing, much hardier. We also have two sets of treatments, one being the established row, so that would have been there before we started the project, before we started sampling and whatnot. And new been planted with these trees as well. This is some of the equipment that we utilize and will utilize because we have some things to do in the field still. Essentially, we're looking at temperature, humidity, soil moisture, hydraulic conductivity, isotopic signatures, and of course, plant growth. So where are we now? I've been in the field for about 2 years now, and we are wrapping up field work, as I mentioned. We just sent off some isotope samples, particularly soil and plant samples, and now we need to compare those to the rainwater. We also opted to do a lab experiment to supplement what is being done in the field. And you're probably wondering, and from the pictures you've seen as well, is vetiver actually working? And I think on the surface, from what I could see now, I would say no, just based on overall. The plants have really taken a lot of losses within these 2 years. And that could be due to a lot of factors that we haven't fully investigated yet, because we have to properly look at, salt density and acidity and whatnot. We opted to not do any amendments, just for the sake of reducing the variability of the study. And I think that should be it. Next slide should be the references. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Vikki, for your very detailed presentation. I know you seemed a bit nervous, but don't worry. Don't worry, it isn't your thesis proposal here today. But thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you're doing with the vetiver. It will help, add to that compendium of information on the applicability of vetiver grass in various landscapes. And I know from PISLM standpoint, we have been using vetiver in the project in Dominica, and hopefully we can bring you on a project later on. So thank you so much again for your presentation. Do we have any questions from the floor for Vikki? Right, so we have a question in the chat. So can you see the question? You can go ahead and answer. You can go ahead.
No, it is native to, the vetiver is native to India, and I believe it's mostly like a riverine plant. I don't think it would be considered invasive. Like I mentioned, it's sterile, it doesn't propagate via seeds or anything. So you probably could say that. Because I imagine too that it may be a bit difficult to remove or extract. But I mean, generally where it's placed, in terms especially soil erosion, I think you'd probably want it to, you'd probably put it where you want it to be, I guess. I'm not sure. But yeah, Petitfair is well, the research behind it, specifically for soil erosion, is very extensive.
Thank you very much, Vikki. I hope that answered the question. And I guess this as well is another gap in research that we can continuously build upon, so that we get all of our information on vetiver if it's indeed the best solution to restoration, to restoring some of our denuded landscapes. So thank you very much, Vikki. Thank you very much for the question, Kent Thomas. I will roll right into our next presenter. We have Miss Tiffany Marcelle, also from Dominica. All right, go right ahead.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Marcelle. As my bio would have indicated, I am a physics lecturer at the college in Dominica, but I'm also an intern at ICA, which is the Inter-Caribbean Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. I am also a farmer, so a woman of the soil. I mainly plant root crops, so this is a topic that I am very passionate about. But today I will be talking about my work at ICA as it relates to the PISLM project currently going on in Dominica. So just a bit of an outline of what I'll be talking about today. I have a background of the project, an introduction, or that's switched, an introduction of the project, a background of Dominica and as to why we need the intervention. And I'll talk a little bit about the project itself and what I'm involved in, which is the data instruments, soil samples, 3D geospatial information, farm installations, and then give a bit of a perspective of how this affects women in agriculture or how this can help women in agriculture. And then finally, through this talk, we can see a couple of career options that women can take in terms of agriculture that doesn't have to deal with hand in soil. Introduction. So PISLM engaged ICA to work under a project titled Sustainable Land Management, Strengthening Resilience of Agricultural Lands and Forests in Dominica. This project has been going on for some time on the island. The picture that's located on this slide would have happened last year in November after 2 hours of rain. So that's to show you how impactful this project is going to be on island or why it's so necessary. Background. So a background about Dominica. Dominica is quoted to be the nature island of the Caribbean, and it is the youngest island in the Lesser Antilles. So we do have quite a bit of volcanic activity on island. We have 9 active volcanoes. In addition to that, we are also in the tropical Atlantic hurricane belt, and we have experienced 15 extreme weather conditions events since 1979. In 1979, the extreme weather event would have been Hurricane David. And then as of recently, or our most recent extreme event would have been Hurricane Maria, which took place in 2017. So the image that you saw before was not a result of an extreme event. It was a result of 2 hours of rain. So these weather events, in addition to poor agricultural practices in some areas, have led to the erosions of our soils, mostly in the forms of landslides. So weather events, Dominica being such a small state, we cannot stop weather events from happening, but we can mitigate some of the risks that we may face using certain agricultural practices or implementing certain things in our homes, in our areas that will help mitigate some of that risk and some of that loss when these weather events do happen as a result of climate change. Starting off to talk about the project. When we're looking at a project, we have to determine who is going to benefit from the project. So the data instruments really help us to find out the biodata of the individuals, and farm assessments help us to determine whether or not these farms need interventions or not. So we would have received a list of farmers from the Ministry of Agriculture. We would have worked with Ministry of Agriculture and gone to these farms and determined which farms were most vulnerable. Again, this is a project, so we have to help everyone within a certain scope. So we can't help everyone that we would like to help. We have to keep it within a specific region of people. So we're looking to see who has the most vulnerable land, but we also have to find out information about the farmers. When you find out information or biodata about the farmers, you find out whether or not they are able to do the scope of work or to maintain the scope of work that you're willing to invest in on their land. So, for example, in Dominica, majority of the female farmers here have either inherited land from their fathers or own land with their husbands. So everyone is almost always joined to a man. But we do find in certain situations that they rent land as well. And this goes for males and females, they both rent land. And people who rent land aren't really always looking to take steps towards keeping the land, right? So if I have a contract for 2 years, I'm going to plant crops that are going to get me a quick reward. Vegetables, I'm going to plant some root crops. And this isn't a bad thing because you're supposed to maintain your livelihood. That's how they're maintaining their livelihood. But as mentioned before, Dominica is a very mountainous island, right? We rarely have any flat land. So if you're planting a lot of root crops on slopes and mountainsides, or if you're planting a lot of vegetables on slopes and mountainsides, this isn't the best for the soil. And a lot of people aren't willing to make the investment to plant tree crops because, again, if the land does not belong to them, the contract can be taken at any time and you don't even get to reap the rewards of things that you purchased. So all of these things are important when trying to determine who gets to benefit from the project. So that was the first step. Second step. So second step would be soil samples. Dominica is a place that's very mountainous and we get a lot of water. So I want you to imagine you have a cup of juice, or let's say a jug of juice, and I pour out half the juice in the jug and I add half a gallon of water. The juice isn't going to taste the same. The sugar content is less, the nutrients is less, and essentially that's the same thing that's happening to our soils. So when it rains a lot and this water has nowhere to go, it goes with the soil. And so it's stripping the nutrients in our soil. So soil test tells you a lot about the health of your soil. It can indicate the levels of acidity and tell you the nutrient content of your soil. So to do soil tests, you would be testing for things like micronutrients, macronutrients, calcium, pesticides, residues, also fertilizer use, density, aggregate, stability in those soils. The reason that this is important is to figure out when we're doing these interventions, what's going to work best with the soil type there. I don't want to go and plant mangoes in an area that I know mangoes will not bear, and then now this is going to be a tree that the farmer cannot necessarily benefit from. Because at the end of the day, you have to find something that's going to benefit the land and benefit the farmer. Nobody's going to do, or nobody's going to accept something that they don't see a cost benefit from it. And that's expected because people have a livelihood to keep up. So it's very important to do soil samples to find out what kind of nutrients are in the soil, what kind of nutrients need to be added to the soil, what would be best suited for the area. And we will see that that has a lot to do with the tree crops that we implement in that area or the type of interventions that we take. So third step would be 3D geospatial. Geospatial data or geodata is data that includes information related to locations on the Earth's surface. You can map objects, events, and other real-world phenomena to specific geographical areas identified by latitude and longitude coordinates. So if anybody has ever used Google Maps is essentially geospatial data. We have satellites taking imageries, different parts of the world, and then we all put it together. So in this project specifically, we aren't using satellite imagery, we're using drone imagery. So when we use the drone imagery, we're able to take pictures of these farms, take pictures of these areas, and then go in and put it into a geospatial production app, and we are able to find out certain things about the land. So as mentioned by Nelissia, in Dominica, we have to plant on the contours. It's very mountainous. So you want to ensure that you're planting on the contours. Using this geospatial information, we can see exactly where the contours are, and we can follow those lines, and we can plant trees along that way, or we can make our contour drains along that way. Because drainage is another thing that's going to be very important when we're doing the interventions on these farms. So geospatial data gives you a lot of information. Geospatial data can also prevent or can cause you to take precautionary measures once you know certain information about your farm. You can find out things about your contours, you can find out the health of your plants, you can find out, you can use certain apps to figure out the water mosaic, and you can see how water runs on the land, which determines how you want to plant things and where you want to plant things. So in the next image, I have two images here of geospatial data. Both of them are female farmers. This farmer in particular is 80 years old, and she works better than me on these slopes. And so we can see by the red lines, these are the contours of her land. So because she plants on a slope, and she plants mostly root crops like dasheen or taro, depending on where you're from, it's going to degrade the land. And you can see some of that degradation in certain areas. To the left bottom part of the picture, you can see where a slide has happened. To the right upper corner, you can see that there's a little slide that has happened there. So to prevent these things from happening, you want to create drains, contour drains, and you can line the contour drains with vetiver plants. So I'm happy that the presentation came before mine, because it gave a little explanation about what the vetiver is. It's a deep-rooted grass. And I think there was a question about whether or not it's an invasive species. It's not an invasive grass. It usually, not usually, always, where you plant the vetiver is where it will stay. You're not going to plant vetiver here and 3 years later see the vetiver elsewhere. It's not an invasive species. It doesn't spread. Where you plant it is where it stays. And it goes, the roots go down to at least 6 feet. So this really helps to stabilize the land. And it'll take about 18 months for it to catch itself. So right now in the rainy season, while it's being planted, it won't have much of an effect now, but for next year for sure, she will be able to see the differences in how the vetiver is able to help her. Also, drainage is important because the water needs somewhere to run. We can see that there is a road located here, and infrastructure is very important. I want to precedence this with saying infrastructure is very important, but we have to know how to control our water. In Dominica, not only do we plant on slopes, but we live on mountain tops and we live on slopes. And all our waters are in the valleys. So what's going to happen is we build our nice houses, very large houses in some instances, and we pave these concrete roads. But now instead of the water seeping into the ground slowly, similar to how ice would seep into juice slowly versus just pouring half a gallon of water, it's now rushing down the roads and piling into one section of a mountain, or rushing down your roofs and piling into a section of your yard. And so in certain countries, we can see they have an issue with flooding because there's a lot of infrastructure, but there's not a lot of drainage. You want to give the water a place to pass, because if you don't, it will take the soil and it will go. If we look at the next farm, we can see the lines are much closer to one another. So this is a very steep plot. This is this plot in Morocco. I know someone asked if we had any demonstration plots in Dominica. This is one of the demonstration plots where activities are going on. You don't see any of this would have been taken prior to any interventions being made. You can see the contour lines. You can see how they're much closer than the last farm that we looked at. If you look to the right corner, close to the road, you can see where a slide has already happened. So when taking interventions, again, this is a farmer who plants root crops because quick reward. When taking interventions for a farm like this, you have to implement the contour drains, step drains for them to be able to get where they're going, because it's a very steep area. But you also have to find out what it is that the farmer wants. Now, the farmer prior is an 80-year-old farmer, but having a plot like this really determines your longevity in farming, right? Because it's not that easy on the knees to be walking such a steep slope every day. So you have to figure out what's best for the farmer. You have to work with the farmer. You have to work with the contour. So the more information you get, the more data that you get, both personal data, geospatial data, data of the area, all of that helps to determine what interventions that you are going to take. So farm installations, oh, the picture is missing. Okay, proposed actions, storm drains, contour drains, step drains, vetiver, tree crops. I've listed quite a few of them a couple times. The proposed actions is really determined by the farmer, for example, in an area called Bells in Dominica. We felt like there was a plot that needed vetiver plants. The farmer decided she doesn't want vetiver plants because she heard it brings snakes. I don't know how true that is, so I cannot verify whether or not vetiver brings snakes, but she didn't want vetiver on her land, and you have to respect the farmer's decisions. So what's the next best thing? Tree crops. So you might want to figure out what tree crops she would like particularly, because maybe she doesn't want avocado, maybe she wants oranges. So we have to purchase oranges under the scope of the project in order to ensure that the land is safe, but also ensure that the farmer is happy. Some drains and contour drains, step drains are a little bit different. You get less pushback when it comes to these things. They see the needs. Drains has been something that we've talked about for many years in Dominica, so no farmer is a stranger to drains, so they are more likely to implement things like the drains, step drain, storm contour, versus implementing things like vetiver. Also, tree crops is something that farmers are usually interested in. So farm installations has a lot to do with the land, but also has a lot to do with what the farmer wants. So perspective. We coexist in this environment together. In fact, we are part of this environment. If everyone can see me, what happens up here is going to affect somebody that's down here. So I can make proposed interventions on one farm, but that one farmer doesn't really affect the larger scope of things. We tend to think of things in very small, individualized manners, and that has happened throughout the agricultural industry. Before in Dominica, you couldn't go anywhere without somebody being in a farmers group. So when you have organized groups, people in specific areas can tell you what is needed for the area. Now people are very individual. This is what I want for my area. But you who live down here, you don't make a lot of, oh, my hand is disappearing. The person who lives at the bottom of the hill doesn't make a lot of decisions. The person who lives at the top of the hill doesn't make a lot of decisions either. Because at the end of the day, the rain, the water, the soil content is going to determine how things grow, is going to determine if things grow, and it's also going to determine if things stay. So we don't want to get to a point where we have no more agricultural lands because it's all been lost due to landslides. It's all been lost due to climate change, which is something that we have really no control of here in smaller islands, right? We are at the mercies of other people. Nothing that I do in Dominica only affects Dominica. It affects everyone in the region through some sort of capacity. So perspective here is we coexist in the environment, we are a part of the environment, so we need to learn to take care of the environment and not do things in an individualized manner. If your farm doesn't need an intervention or you think somebody at the top of you may be better suited for the intervention, then it would be better to pass that opportunity along to a person, because no amount of vetiver at the bottom of the hill is going to stop the top of the hill from coming down. It can only really affect your specific area. So moving forward, I would just like us to think about that. Career options in agriculture. Agriculture is a massive industry and you can get in almost everywhere. I think a lot of the times, because we are in the Caribbean, our knowledge of farming is hand to soil. And that is not the case. You can be involved in agriculture, you can be involved in the environment in many different capacities. So for example, I talk about data in the beginning, you can be a data analysis. You can be, this one is a little bit different because your hand has to be in the soil. Pedology studies soil. You can be a drone pilot if that is what you're interested in doing. And these things, you can be a drone pilot to look at contours, to observe the land, but then you can also be a drone pilot for advertising purposes. You can make your own small business from it. You don't have to be a pilot, but we also need somebody to study the data that the pilot compiles. And so you can work in geoinformatics. I know you in the St. Augustine campus, that's where we went to do a small training for geospatial information under another project, the EBA project, which is working with vetiver as well. And so there are regions in the Caribbean where we can study this information and move from there. You can become an agricultural scientist. You can work in the government for the Ministry of Agriculture, or you could work for the planning department. You can become a farmer, that is hand to soil, but a farmer can be broken down into many things. You can become an agro-processor. The vetiver plant has multitude of uses. So Nelissia mentioned that the Kalinago people in Dominica really use the land. They make baskets, mats, and curtains, quite a few other things using the dried vetiver plants. You can use vetiver oils to make soaps. You can use vetiver as mulch. Vetiver can be used in a multitude of different areas. You can become an environmental engineer or a project manager. So I'm just here to say that the career options for women in agriculture are varying, right? There's not a single job that I haven't mentioned here that I haven't come across a woman in it throughout the lifeline of this project, which is soon coming to an end at the end of June. But that puts an end to my project. If anybody has any questions, I am more than happy to.
All right, great. Thanks, Tiffany. You could really tell that you're a teacher, the way that you put forward the information. So I really appreciate that. And, thanks so much for bringing the spatial aspect to the work. It was really well put together. And actually, I saw a question in the chat from our project manager, Mr. Thompson, but I think you answered it at the last when you were speaking about the byproducts of vetiver and so on. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go. Oh, I see Mr. Providence. Mr. Providence, you have a question? Go right ahead.
Yes, not a question, but a clarification. I just want to commend the two presentations. But the second presentation from Dominica actually answered the question about the invasive nature of vetiver. It's not invasive. And we in St. Vincent and the Grenadines have been using it for many years for contour bank in terms of protecting the contours, and it's used in combination with contour drains, which helps to save soil and water conservation. So I just wanted to, there was a misleading statement made, so I just wanted, from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, so I just wanted to correct that it has been used for many years in terms of the protection of our soils and our agricultural land, and also it's been used in road engineering in terms of protecting the roads from slipping on the steep slopes, because you're going across the contour. The deep roots help instead of using the heavy back walls. And also it has multiple use. We've used it in conservation and livelihoods in terms of the basket making and also the aromatic oils and so on. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Providence. Thank you so much again, Tiffany, for the wonderful presentation. All right, so we'll rush right into the next presentation. I don't want to keep anyone from their lunch. And so we have Miss Sunshine de Caires. She's also a PhD student at the University of the West Indies. So Ms. de Caires, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. As said before, I am a PhD student. I'm currently studying tropical earth and environmental science at the University of the West Indies. And first and foremost, I would like to thank PISLM for the opportunity to present my work on land and water management. Briefly, I would like to introduce you to common geophysical methods used in soil science. Next, I would use a study site in the northern range of Trinidad as a case for how geophysical methods can help us to manage our land and water resources. In soil science, geophysical methods exploit different fields to study the physical and chemical conditions of soil, surface, and or subsurface soil physiochemical properties. Geophysical methods are used to rapidly obtain spatially dense, non-invasive measurements from point to watershed scales that can be related to soil conditions. For example, airborne EM can be used to identify regional scale subsurface flow paths. Aeromagnetic induction reveal faults and buried bedrocks to even greater depths. providing additional information on flow paths. Time domain electromagnetic sounding methods can generally sense the subsurface architecture to depths of 100 meters, which makes these methods suitable for identifying aquifers. A combination of all these methods can be used to reconstruct regional geologic structure within a watershed and identify areas that require more intensive study at smaller scales. In my research, I use the electromagnetic induction technique. To the top right-hand corner of the slide, you would see the device that I use. It's called a DULEM 1S EC meter. It's connected to a field computer, which gives you, and a GPS receiver, which gives you georeference points at spatially intensive depths, because we collect measurements every 1 second. So a survey, an ECA survey of a field can range from thousands to hundreds of thousands of data points. How does this instrument work? It induces a primary magnetic field that interacts with the soil and soil solution and creates secondary currents. These currents are received by the receiver sensor and is interpreted as a measurement that we call apparent soil electrical conductivity. Apparent soil electrical conductivity, this particular machine gives you that reading at 2 depths of exploration. At the top, 0 to 0.5 meters, and at the bottom, or through a depth of 0 to 1.6 meters. So watersheds provide essential ecosystem services, including carbon storage, nutrients, carbon storage and sequestration, nutrient cycling, water flow regulation, erosion control, water quality maintenance, soil formation, flood control, food and timber supply, water table regulation, and biodiversity support. The northern range of Trinidad is critical to the nation's freshwater supply, as it contains about 80% of the country's surface freshwater sources. However, these slopes are characterized by, lands are characterized by steep slopes and usually gets intense precipitation during the rainy season, which promotes excessive runoff, continuous erosion, nutrient leaching, and limits the water holding capacity of soils. These deleterious effects are exacerbated by changes in land cover. So one of the major impacts of changing the land cover in watershed is that the watershed soils will begin to degrade, which usually presents itself through accelerated erosion, decline in soil fertility, increased incidence of flooding, soil and water pollution and contamination, decline in soil biodiversity, and biogeochemical activities. For sustainable management purposes, therefore, it is important to understand how physiochemical soil properties and soil depth vary across the topographic sequence, as these surface and subsurface soil characteristics play distinctive roles in the ecosystem services provided by the watershed. So in my research, I wanted to characterize these soils in the northern range that exhibit high spatial variability using a simple, inexpensive, reliable, and rapid method. The EMI technique offers the possibility of collecting spatially dense measurements at 2 depths of estimation, as I mentioned before, which captures small to large scale soil physiochemical variability and processes at the watershed stage. So the objectives were to investigate the relationship between soil ECA and the measured soil and landform parameters in a sub-watershed in the northern range that contain 3 of the main land uses that we would usually find in the northern range, which is forest, savanna grassland, and cultivation. And we wanted to map and examine the temporal and spatial stability of the ECA in the context that we would like to use the ECA in future research, or we have in future research, to model the spatial distribution of soil properties. So this was the methodology that we followed, and I will go into it in more detail. So in the northern range, we identified Maracas as a site within Maracas as the study site, which was a 50 by 150 meter site that contained the land uses of interest, and we sampled along a transect. As I mentioned before, we utilized the electromagnetic induction technique in my research. What I did not mention is that we did 2 wet season and 2 dry season EMI surveys in order to assess the stability of the ECA signal across seasons. So at each sampling point, we conducted various in-field measurements and we collected soil samples, which we carried back to the lab to analyze the physiochemical soil properties. The data analysis in this study was geared towards determining, one, whether or not the difference or changes in land use affected the distribution of the soil properties across the study site, and 2, to assess what is the relationship between ECA and measured soil properties, and 3, to determine whether or not we could use the ECA to model some of these soil properties. So the descriptive statistics showed that the soil was generally shallow, coarse textured, low in electrical conductivity, low in organic matter, and had high variability in terms of the slope. The Pearson's correlation table was used to determine if there was a relationship between the ECA and any of the measured properties, and the ones that are highlighted, you can see that there was a significant relationship, I think at the 0.01 level. So we did ANOVAs to answer the question if soil properties varied among the land uses, and yes, they did. However, we didn't see any land use driven variation. The variation that we saw there could be attributed mainly to the slope rather than the land. We used stepwise linear regression in order to assess which properties influence the EMI signal, and soil depth influence the top signal, which we designated ECAS, as well as the water stable aggregates. And for the lower signal, the soil depth, the clay content, and the pH was influenced the ECD signal. So we're getting into the geospatial part of this. We wanted to create maps, and in order to do that, we needed to assess the spatial autocorrelation, and we used the semi-variograms in order to assess the spatial autocorrelation of the ECS signal. From the semi-variograms, we saw that ECS models had larger nuggets and lower sills than corresponding ECD models, indicating that the ECS datasets were less spatially autocorrelated than ECAD measurements. Generally, seasonal conditions did not have major effects on the structure of the variogram model. However, the absolute ECA values changed over time. Thus, ECA can be used to model the spatial variability of soil properties across seasons in the study site. So we then went on to CRIG to use geospatial analysis in order to CRIG the ECA data that we got there. And from the visual analysis, you can see that it didn't change much across time. So that's visually, it indicates that it is temporarily stable. However, we wanted to quantify this stability. So we used this Spearman's rank correlation to do that. And the results indicated that yes, all of the ECA surveys was stable. However, the ECAD models signal was more stable than the ECAS signal. This is similar to what was done before, but just in a map form, and it gives you an indication of where MPhil had the greatest amount of change over time. So the red areas are the areas in the field that had the greatest change over time. So in conclusion, edaphic factors and ECA along a topic sequence were assessed using multivariate geostatistics. The spatial distribution of soil properties can be attributed to topography, not land use. That explained the majority of the ECA signal, both ECAS and ECAD. ECA was spatial temporally stable, and therefore it could be used to model the field scale variations in soil depth, water stable aggregates, pH, and clay content, which are the properties that the multiple linear regression indicated that it was related to. So it can be used to model these properties rapidly assess using this non-invasive time and resource-friendly method, which would replace traditional soil survey methods for land and water resource management. I'd like to thank the people that helped me during this project. This is a list of some of the references that I mentioned, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Caires. And I'm still in awe at the amount of statistics and data you would have compiled for your project. I can't even imagine how much resources and how many sleepless nights would have gone into conducting this type of work. And generally, to all of the presenters we've had today, I can see for those who PISLM haven't engaged as yet for work, I can already see so many opportunities given the talents that you have displayed today, and the amount of work that you have put into your respective fields. And that being said, I would like to encourage everyone here and on behalf of the PISLM team to applaud all of you for all the amazing work you are doing now and the presentations you would have presented to us today. And for everyone's benefit, we hope to have these presentations circulated to those who would have registered, so you can go back and look at the work that was presented today. Do we have any questions for Ms. Caires or any of the presenters at this point in time? Ken Thomas would like to see Ms. Caires slide 21 once more. What I'll do, Mr. Thomas, once you have registered via the link, we'll send the presentations to you. In the interest of time, we might not be able to do that at this time. So I would like to thank so much my Information Technology Officer, Mr. Gerald Eastman, our Media Officer, Ms. Rashida Saran Davis, our esteemed guests, Mr. Joseph Noel and Ms. Derelle Dubois for their opening remarks, as well as the Executive Director. I don't want to keep anyone much longer, but I would like to thank once again our presenters. Job well done. And of course, PISLM will continue to engage our youths from across the Caribbean to have their work, have their contributions to our Caribbean space visible, heard, and of course, implemented in as much as possible. Thanks so much to our attendees from the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. Thanks for your efforts in marketing the webinar. To our project assistants, our UNCCD focal points as well. Thank you so much for attending today. On behalf of the Executive Director, I would like to thank you all and express our appreciation for your attendance and for your continued efforts in land and soil projects and research in the Caribbean, and look forward to working with all of you in the near future. So with those words being said, thank you once again, and I wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day.